My world was shattered into a million pieces when, just after my daughter's death, my own son-in-law tossed me out of the house as if I were nothing more than a piece of garbage. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. While the will was being read, he had the audacity to sneer at me. "You won't get a single penny from your daughter's will. I'll make sure of that." But the lawyer, Mr. Finch, just offered a serene smile and said, "There is one final point, and it is the most important one." When he read it aloud, my son-in-law collapsed in a dead faint. "You will not believe what was written in that final clause. Finally, I can get some rest. Eleanor was so exhausting to care for these past few months." The words struck me with the force of a physical blow, drenching me in ice water. I stood there, frozen solid next to my daughter's casket, the funeral program trembling uncontrollably in my hands. Victor glanced at his phone again, his thumb scrolling through messages as if he hadn't just spoken of my deceased daughter like she was a heavy burden. He was relieved to finally set down. "Victor." My voice was a raw, cracking whisper against the frigid March air. "We just laid my daughter to rest. Could you please show a sliver of respect for her memory?" He lifted his gaze from his screen, a flash of pure irritation crossing his impeccably groomed face. The wind howled through the cemetery, scattering the pristine white lilies that Clara had so carefully placed on the neighboring graves. The other mourners, who had been slowly making their way to their cars, had fallen silent. Their conversations had ceased. They were all listening now. "Your daughter?" Victor's laugh was a sharp, bitter sound that seemed to desecrate the solemn air. "She was my wife, Margaret, and now everything that was hers is mine." The funeral program ripped in my clenched fist. My orderly, civil engineer's mind, a mind that always sought precision and logic, simply could not compute the venom I was hearing. This man had stood by Eleanor's side for 7 years. He had made a sacred vow to love her in sickness and in health. And yet here he was, not even 30 minutes after we had lowered her into the cold, unforgiving earth, speaking only of possessions and ownership. "What is the matter with you?" I whispered, the words carrying much further than I had intended on the biting wind. "Could you at least pretend to be sad?" Mark Jennings, Eleanor's business partner, had paused his walk. He stood a mere 20 feet away, his hand on his wife's arm. Both of them were staring at us, their faces masks of undisguised shock. Clara Davis was moving closer now, her own face pale with a deep and growing concern. Victor casually slipped his phone into the pocket of his designer suit. "Sad? Margaret, please. I've been meticulously planning my new life for months. Eleanor knew this marriage was over. We both did." "That's a lie." The words felt strangled as they escaped my throat. "She loved you. Even when she had cancer?" He adjusted the lapel of his expensive black coat, the very one Eleanor had bought him for their anniversary last year. "The cancer was convenient. It gave me time to think, to make my plans. Now, I can finally start living again." Clara reached us just as Victor turned to head toward the parking lot. "Victor, please. This is neither the time nor the place." "Actually, Clara, this is the perfect time." Victor's expensive shoes clicked sharply against the concrete path. "I have spent the last 18 months of my life playing the part of the devoted husband. I am done with the performance." The few remaining guests had gathered in small, tight clusters, their whispers a low hum against the wind. Mrs. Gable from our church slowly shook her head, her disappointment palpable. The 3 young women from Eleanor's engineering team looked deeply uncomfortable, shuffling their feet and pointedly avoiding anyone's gaze. I watched Victor walk away, his stride full of a confidence and purpose that churned my stomach. He hadn't shed a single tear throughout the entire service. Not one. While I had barely been able to hold myself together as I read her eulogy, he had sat there in the front pew, repeatedly checking his watch and tapping his manicured nails against the dark wood of the bench. "Margaret?" Clara's gentle hand touched my shoulder. "Are you okay?" I couldn't form a response. My throat felt raw, scraped clean by a wave of disbelief and a building, righteous anger. The man Eleanor had entrusted with her life, her thriving business, her boundless love. He had been counting down the days until her death, planning his triumphant escape while she fought valiantly for every single breath. The wind picked up again, its mournful sound rattling the bare branches above us. Victor reached his sleek silver sports car, the one Eleanor had surprised him with for their 5th anniversary. He didn't look back, not even once, standing there beside my daughter's grave. I was left to wonder what Eleanor would think. If she could see him now, would she be heartbroken? Furious? Or had she, in her infinite wisdom, suspected the monstrous truth I was only just beginning to grasp? The expensive car pulled away smoothly, disappearing around the cemetery's curved road. I was alone now, with only Clara waiting patiently beside me, and the distant figures of the groundskeepers, preparing to fill the empty space in the earth. My hands were still shaking as I looked down at Eleanor's photograph in the torn program. Her smile beamed back at me, so full of confidence and warmth, just the way she'd always been. It was the way she'd been even during those final, agonizing weeks, when she was making mysterious phone calls to Mr. Alistair Finch and insisting that everything would be taken care of. Looking at Eleanor's bright face in that photograph, I felt something inside my chest crack open. It wasn't just grief this time, but something far deeper. It was pride, mingled with a desperate, aching, longing for just one more conversation with my brilliant girl. The wind scattered more flower petals across the fresh grave dirt. I closed my eyes and let the memories wash over me. Eleanor, at just 8 years old, standing in our garage workshop with model airplane glue on her fingers and a fierce determination in her dark eyes. She had insisted on painting her planes in vibrant shades of teal and rose gold instead of the realistic silver and gray the instruction manual suggested. "Mom, why do planes have to be boring colors?" she'd asked, holding up her dazzling teal fighter jet. "I want to make mine different. Special." Even then, she had refused to blindly follow conventional rules. While other kids built their models exactly as the box directed, Eleanor experimented. She would modify wing angles, adjust the landing gear, and invent her own unique color schemes. Half of her planes crashed spectacularly during their test flights, but the ones that flew, they were absolutely magnificent. I opened my eyes and looked at the photograph again. That same stubborn, beautiful creativity had made her a millionaire. A family dinner at Northwestern University in 2016. Eleanor, explaining her latest business idea, while gesturing excitedly with her fork. Her father had passed away the year before, and these Sunday dinners had become a sacred ritual for the two of us. "I have an idea for an app that could help people organize their schedules better," she'd said, her eyes shining with possibility. "But not just another calendar, Mom. Something that learns your patterns, predicts what you need, and helps you make smarter decisions about your time." I had worried she was dreaming too big. "Honey, there are already so many scheduling apps out there, but none that think like we do," she'd insisted. She'd pulled out her phone, sketching out wireframes on a napkin. What if technology could actually make our lives simpler instead of more complicated? That app became TimeSync. Within 2 years, she had sold it for $12 million. But the memory that cut the deepest was from just 3 years ago. Eleanor had driven to my house in Evanston, arriving unannounced on a Tuesday evening with a bottle of champagne and news that would change everything. "Mom, I'm going to take care of you when you retire. You've worked hard enough your whole life." She'd pulled out her phone, showing me the latest valuation report for her new company, TechFlow Solutions. $70 million, Mom. Can you believe it? I couldn't. My daughter, the little girl who once built teal airplanes in my garage, had created something worth more money than I had earned in my entire career as a civil engineer. Ellie, that's incredible, but I don't need— Yes, you do. Her voice had been firm but so gentle. You've taken care of me my whole life. Let me return the favor. I'm buying you that workshop you've always wanted. The one with proper ventilation and all the tools you've been dreaming about. That workshop now sat in my backyard, barely used since her diagnosis. I had been too busy taking care of her to even think about building anything. Clara cleared her throat softly. Margaret, it's getting cold. Maybe we should go. I shook my head. I wasn't ready to leave her yet, not when these memories were all I had left of her voice, her infectious laugh, her absolute, unwavering certainty that everything would always work out for the best. Eleanor had always been a planner. Even as a child, she would map out her days, her projects, her dreams, with an engineering precision that mirrored my own. She had inherited that from me, the need to understand how things worked, to identify and fix problems before they could become disasters. But there was one problem she couldn't fix. One timeline she couldn't control. The memory I had been avoiding all day finally pushed its way to the forefront of my mind. Eleanor's phone call, 18 months ago. Her voice so steady despite the news that would shatter everything we had ever planned. Mom, I have cancer, but I'm going to fight this. Standing there in the biting cemetery wind, I realized I needed to remember that fight too. Not just the good times, but the harrowing battle that had shown me who my daughter truly was, and who her husband really wasn't. The phone call that changed our world came on a Tuesday morning in September 2023. I was in my yard, rebuilding my neighbor's fence, when Eleanor called, her voice sounding unusually formal. Mom, I have cancer, but I'm going to fight this. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 3. The words landed like sledgehammer blows. Aggressive. Advanced. A poor prognosis. I dropped my tools and drove straight to Northwestern Memorial Hospital, where Eleanor was meeting with her oncology team. She looked so small and fragile in that sterile hospital bed, but her eyes were filled with a fierce determination. Victor sat beside her, perfectly composed, already taking notes on his phone about treatment schedules and logistical details. The doctors say chemotherapy could give us 18 months. Maybe 2 years if we're lucky, Eleanor had explained, her brilliant business mind already processing the scenarios. I've arranged for Mark to handle the day-to-day operations at TechFlow. Dr. Matthews outlined the treatment plan. Aggressive chemotherapy every 3 weeks. Possible surgery if the tumors responded. And radiation therapy to manage the pain. Eleanor listened as if she were planning a product launch, asking detailed, insightful questions about success rates and side effects. I'll drive you to your treatments, I'd said immediately. Victor looked up from his phone. Actually, Margaret, I can handle her medical appointments. You don't need to worry about that. But within 3 months, his tune had changed completely. By March of 2024, Eleanor was halfway through her chemotherapy regimen, and the treatments were absolutely brutal. She had lost 30 pounds and most of her beautiful hair, but she still insisted on attending important business meetings. I had started driving her to every single appointment, because Victor had started making excuses. I can't watch this anymore, he told me one afternoon, while Eleanor was asleep, recovering from her latest chemo session. You're better at taking care of her anyway. She needs someone stronger right now. Stronger? As if loving my daughter through her devastating illness was some kind of tedious chore instead of a profound privilege. By summer, I had moved into their guest room. Eleanor needed help with basic tasks, cooking meals she could actually keep down, managing her complex medication schedule, getting to and from treatments when she was too weak to drive. Victor had retreated into his home office, claiming he was managing the emotional stress by staying busy. The truth, I now realized, was far simpler. He was planning his exit. I would occasionally overhear him on phone calls with real estate agents, discussing property values and market timing. He had researched divorce attorneys, though he never filed the papers. Why bother, when cancer was going to solve his problem for him far more efficiently? How much longer is this going to take? He had asked me one evening in October, while Eleanor was upstairs resting. I have plans to make, Margaret. I can't put my entire life on hold indefinitely. I had stared at him, utterly speechless. My daughter was fighting for her very life, and he was irritated by the inconvenience of it all. But Eleanor saw more than I had realized at the time. During her final month, when the treatments had stopped working and hospice care began, she made a series of mysterious appointments with Mr. Alistair Finch, her family attorney. They would meet in Eleanor's home office for hours, going over documents that I wasn't allowed to see. "Mom, I've taken care of your future," she told me during one of our last real conversations. Her voice was weak, but her eyes were as sharp as ever with purpose. "Trust Mr. Finch. He'll explain everything after I'm gone. Ellie, you don't need to worry about me. Just focus on resting." "I'm not getting better, Mom." Her honesty was brutal and clean, like everything else about her. "But I've made sure Victor can't hurt you or anyone else who mattered to me." I hadn't fully understood what she meant then, but sitting beside her grave now, watching the groundskeepers approach with their shovels, I was beginning to suspect that my daughter had been planning one final project, the most important one of her life. The wind was getting stronger, and the last of the mourners had finally disappeared. Clara had retreated to her car, giving me the space I needed to grieve in private. Soon, I would have to leave Eleanor here in the cold ground and return to a world where Victor believed he had won everything. But something in my daughter's final words suggested the game wasn't over yet. Footsteps crunched across the cemetery gravel behind me. I turned to see Mark Jennings approaching with Clara and two other colleagues, their faces somber with genuine grief. These were the people who had actually cared about Eleanor. Unlike the man who was still standing 15 feet away, still checking his phone. "Margaret?" Mark extended his hand, his grip firm and warm. "Eleanor was brilliant. Her company changed our entire industry. The way she revolutionized project management software. We'll never see another mind like hers." Before I could respond, Victor's voice cut through the cold air like shattering glass. "Yes. And now that brilliance will finally pay off." He looked up from his screen, a satisfied smile playing on his lips. "All those years of hard work are about to benefit the right people." Mark's face went pale. Clara stepped closer to me, her motherly instincts sensing the impending danger. The other colleagues exchanged uncomfortable glances, suddenly finding their own shoes utterly fascinating. "Victor," I said quietly, "these people are here to honor Eleanor." "Oh, I'm honoring her." He slipped his phone into his purse with a deliberate slowness, by making sure her success isn't wasted on sentiment. Dr. Evelyn Reed, one of Eleanor's lead developers, cleared her throat awkwardly. "We should probably head back to the office. There are projects to discuss." "Actually," Victor said, his voice rising with a false cheerfulness, "there won't be any projects for a while. I'll be reorganizing everything once the legal formalities are complete." Mark's jaw tightened. "Victor, Eleanor built that company with specific goals. Her team knows how to. Her team works for me now." He checked his expensive watch, the one Eleanor had bought for their anniversary. "Everything works for me now." "One?" Clara discreetly pressed a small piece of folded paper into my palm. It was her phone number, written in careful script. "If you need anything," she whispered, "you can always call." I nodded gratefully, tucking the paper into my coat pocket. At least someone in this world still understood basic human decency. The remaining guests began their awkward departures, murmuring quick condolences before hurrying toward the parking area. Mrs. Gable shook her head as she passed Victor, disapproval etched across her weathered features. The young pastor who had conducted the service looked like he wanted to say something, then clearly thought better of it. Within 10 minutes, only Victor and I remained beside Eleanor's grave. The temperature was dropping as evening approached, and my breath came out in small white puffs. He seemed immune to the cold, energized by some internal fire I was only beginning to understand. "Margaret?" His tone shifted, becoming businesslike and sharp. "We need to discuss housing arrangements." Something ice-cold settled in my stomach. "What do you mean?" "I mean your living situation." He pulled out his car keys, jingling them impatiently. "We'll handle this at the house. There are some documents you need to see." The way he said documents made my engineering mind start calculating probabilities. None of them were good. Eleanor had been so careful about everything else. Had she somehow missed this one detail? Failed to protect me from her own husband? "Victor, I've lived in that house for 18 months, ever since Eleanor got sick." "Yes." His smile was as sharp as the winter wind. "And now, Eleanor is gone." He turned and walked toward his silver sports car, his heels clicking against the concrete with mechanical precision. I watched his confident stride. The way he moved like someone who had already won a game I didn't even know we were playing. Standing alone beside my daughter's grave, I felt the first real fear I'd experienced since her diagnosis. Eleanor had warned me to trust Mr. Finch. But Mr. Finch wasn't here. The only person who might have answers was walking away from me, toward a car that cost more than my annual pension. I looked down at Eleanor's photograph one last time, then folded the funeral program carefully and slipped it into my jacket pocket, right next to Clara's phone number. Whatever Victor had planned, I was about to find out. The 15-minute drive to Evanston passed in a suffocating, heavy silence. Victor drove with the radio off, his manicured fingers tapping a restless rhythm against the leather-wrapped steering wheel, in time with some internal countdown only he could hear. I watched the familiar Chicago suburbs roll past the passenger window, each landmark a painful reminder of the countless drives I'd taken with Eleanor over the years. When we turned into the circular driveway of the sprawling family mansion, my headlights caught something that made my breath catch in my throat. 3 large suitcases were sitting on the front steps like abandoned luggage. "What are those?" I asked, though a cold dread was already coiling in my stomach. I knew the answer. Victor parked with deliberate precision and turned off the engine. "Your belongings are by the door. This house is mine now." I stared at the suitcases, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. "Victor, this is illegal. I'm officially registered here. This is my address on all my legal documents." He stepped out of the car and walked to the front door with confident strides, pulling out his house keys. "Read the rental agreement, Margaret. Eleanor rented you a room. The lease ended with her death." "Rental agreement?" I followed him up the brick steps, my legs feeling weak and unsteady. "What rental agreement?" Instead of unlocking the door, he reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a manila folder. Inside were 3 pages of legal documents, neatly typed and bearing what looked like Eleanor's signature from 12 months ago. "Room rental agreement," he read aloud, his voice crisp with satisfaction. "Month-to-month tenancy between landlord Eleanor Grant and tenant Margaret Grant. Automatic termination upon the death of the landlord." My hands shook as I examined the papers under the dim glow of the porch light. Eleanor's signature looked authentic. The dates were correct. The legal language was precise and binding. "We just buried your wife," I said, my voice cracking with disbelief. "And now my new life begins." He stood in the doorway, his arms crossed, physically blocking my entry to the house where I had lovingly cared for my dying daughter. "Without you, Eleanor would never have wanted this. She loved me. She wanted me to be taken care of. Eleanor is dead." His voice was flat, utterly devoid of emotion. I'm alive. And this property belongs to me. The deed is in my name as the surviving spouse. I looked past him into the warm, lighted hallway where Eleanor and I had shared so many precious conversations during her illness. The workshop she had built for me was visible through the kitchen window. $10,000 worth of tools and equipment I'd barely had time to use. My tools? My workshop? Your workshop is on my property. You can arrange to have everything moved once you find somewhere else to live. Where am I supposed to go? It's nearly 7 o'clock on the day of my daughter's funeral. That's not my problem. He stepped aside just enough to grab the front door handle. Your belongings are packed. Your rental period has expired. If you're not gone in 15 minutes, I'll call the police for trespassing. The casual, calculated cruelty in his voice was breathtaking. This man had eaten dinner at my table, had accepted my care and support during Eleanor's illness, had smiled and played the role of the devoted husband while planning this exact monstrous moment. I walked down to my old sedan and began loading the suitcases into the trunk and back seat. Everything I now owned fit into 3 bags: clothes, a few cherished books, Eleanor's photographs, and the small box of model airplanes we had built together when she was a little girl. Victor watched from the doorway, his silhouette framed by the warm light of the house that was no longer my home. He didn't move to help. He didn't utter another word. He simply waited for me to finish and leave. As I closed the car trunk, he called out one final statement. "Don't come back without an appointment, Margaret. This is private property now." The door closed with a solid, final click, followed by the distinct sound of deadbolts turning. Lights began switching off inside the house, room by room, as if he were methodically erasing my very presence from every space I had occupied. I sat in my car for a long moment, the engine running, the heater blowing warm air against my numb face. Through the window, I could see the dark shape of the workshop Eleanor had built for me, the tools inside glinting in the darkness. 18 months of my life had been spent in that house, caring for my daughter, watching her fight and fail, and ultimately die with more dignity than this man would ever know. Now, I was homeless on the day of her funeral. The radio played soft jazz as I drove away from Evanston, following the signs toward one of Chicago's cheaper motels. In my rearview mirror, the grand mansion grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared entirely, taking with it the last physical connection to my daughter's life. But Victor had made one critical mistake. He had shown his hand far too early. Eleanor had been planning something with Mr. Alistair Finch, and tomorrow, I was going to find out exactly what it was. The flickering neon sign reading "Vacancy" at the Midwest Inn looked like a lifeline in the deepening darkness. I had spent 2 hours driving through Chicago's outer suburbs, comparing rates at establishments that grew progressively shabbier as my options narrowed. $65 per night was manageable for a few days, though my modest savings wouldn't stretch much further than that. The desk clerk barely looked up from his magazine as I signed the register. Room 127 was at the far end of the parking lot, wedged between a noisy ice machine and a stairwell that reeked of stale cigarettes and industrial disinfectant. Inside, the room felt like stepping backward in time. A faded floral bedspread, wood-grain furniture from the 1982nd, and a bathroom barely large enough to turn around in. The stark contrast with the mansion I had called home just hours ago would have been laughable if it weren't so utterly devastating. I unpacked methodically, hanging my funeral suit in the narrow closet, and arranging my few belongings on the small table by the window. The rental agreement documents lay spread across the scratched surface, like evidence at a crime scene. Under the harsh overhead light, Eleanor's signature looked even more authentic, more damning. Outside, highway traffic hummed steadily past the motel, punctuated by the occasional groan of a truck downshifting or a motorcycle roaring toward the city. The sound was oddly comforting, a constant proof that the world kept moving even when your own life had just completely derailed. I found Mr. Alistair Finch's business card in my wallet, tucked behind a photo of Eleanor at her college graduation. The card was slightly bent from years of being carried, but the phone number was still perfectly legible. An old rotary phone sat on the nightstand, another relic from decades past that somehow felt appropriate for my current situation. Mr. Finch answered on the third ring, his voice professionally warm despite the late hour. Finch and Associates, Alistair speaking. Mr. Finch. This is Margaret Grant. I apologize for calling so late, but I need a legal consultation. Margaret. His tone shifted immediately to one of genuine concern. My deepest condolences about Eleanor. She was an extraordinary young woman. What's happened? I explained the eviction, the shocking rental agreement, and Victor's calculated, cruel timing. Mr. Finch listened without interruption, occasionally making small sounds of acknowledgement that told me he was taking careful notes. Is this legal? I asked when I had finished. Can he really throw me out on the day of her funeral? Unfortunately, if the rental agreement is valid, he does have the legal right to terminate the tenancy upon the landlord's death. Illinois law is quite specific about month-to-month arrangements. He paused, and I could hear papers rustling in the background. However, there are other matters we need to discuss. Can you come to my office tomorrow morning? What kind of matters? Eleanor's will reading. There are provisions you should be aware of. Something in his voice made my pulse quicken. Provisions? I can't discuss the details over the phone, but Eleanor was very thorough in her planning. Very thoughtful about the people she cared about. Another pause. Bring the rental agreement documents with you. I'll need to examine them carefully. We scheduled the appointment for 10 o'clock the next morning. After hanging up, I sat on the edge of the lumpy motel bed, looking out at the parking lot, where my old sedan sat, surrounded by pickup trucks and aging sedans. A family was unloading suitcases 2 doors down, a father, a mother, and 2 young children, who seemed genuinely excited about their motel adventure. I thought about Eleanor's final words to me. Trust Mr. Finch. He'll explain everything. At the time, I had assumed she was talking about funeral arrangements or simple estate matters. But something in Mr. Finch's voice suggested my daughter had been planning for much more than I had ever realized. The photograph of Eleanor at her graduation smiled at me from the nightstand. 22 years old, full of dreams and determination, standing proudly beside me in her cap and gown. She had whispered something to me that day. Mom, someday I'm going to take care of you the way you've always taken care of me. Maybe, just maybe, she had found a way to keep that promise, even from beyond the grave. I turned off the harsh overhead light and settled back against the thin pillows. Through the paper-thin walls, I could hear a television playing sitcom laugh tracks and the distant sound of the family next door settling in for the night. Tomorrow, I would finally learn what Eleanor had really been planning during those mysterious meetings with her lawyer. Tonight, I would try to get some sleep and prepare for whatever revelation awaited me in the morning. 4 days at the Midwest Inn had taught me the grim rhythm of desperation. Wake at dawn to the incessant noise of the highway, shower in a stall barely wide enough for my shoulders, choke down instant coffee and a stale donut from the vending machine, count the diminishing pile of bills in my wallet, and calculate how many more nights I could afford. March 20th arrived gray and cold, but it felt different. Today held answers. I dressed carefully in my best suit, the navy one Eleanor had insisted I buy for her wedding 7 years ago. The bitter irony was not lost on me. In the cracked motel mirror, I looked exactly like what I was. A 65-year-old woman trying desperately to maintain her dignity while living in a $65 a night room. The drive downtown took 45 minutes through the thick morning traffic. Chicago's magnificent skyline emerged gradually, its glass towers reaching toward overcast clouds that promised a late-season snow. I had driven these same streets countless times during my engineering career, but today it felt like I was entering a foreign territory. Finch and Associates occupied the entire 28th floor of a gleaming office building in the Loop. The silent, swift elevator ride gave me just enough time to steady my nerves and review the list of questions I had prepared. Mr. Finch had been cryptic during our phone conversation, mentioning surprises and provisions without offering any specifics. The reception area whispered of expensive legal services, mahogany furniture, original artwork on the walls, and a breathtaking view of Lake Michigan that probably cost more per month than my entire pension. The receptionist, a professional woman in her 30s, smiled warmly when I announced myself. "Mrs. Grant, Mr. Finch is expecting you. Conference room B." Alistair Finch rose from behind a long table covered with stacks of legal documents when I entered. He was younger than I had expected, maybe 55, with graying temples and the confident handshake of someone accustomed to handling other people's crises. "Margaret, thank you for coming." His voice carried a genuine warmth beneath its professional tone. "Please sit. Coffee?" "Thank you." I settled into a leather chair that likely cost more than my monthly rent used to. "Mr. Finch, I need to understand my situation. Victor has made it abundantly clear that he considers me an obstacle to be removed." He poured coffee from a silver service, his movements deliberate and calming. "Eleanor left a very detailed will. There will be surprises." "What kind of surprises?" "Victor claims that everything belongs to him as the surviving spouse." Eleanor anticipated various scenarios. Mr. Finch's smile was slight but deeply encouraging. "Trust the process, Margaret. Your daughter was extraordinarily thorough." I pulled out the rental agreement documents Victor had produced. "What about this? Can he really evict me based on Eleanor being my landlord?" Mr. Finch examined the papers carefully, his expression revealing nothing. "The rental agreement appears to be legitimate. However, inheritance law is complex. There are protections for family members that can supersede simple landlord-tenant relationships." "What about the house? Can I return?" "Stay at the motel for now." His tone was firm but reassuring. "Everything will become clear very soon. I have scheduled the formal will reading for this Friday at 2 o'clock. All parties will be present." "All parties?" "You, Victor, and any witnesses Eleanor specified. Mark Jennings from the company. Clara Davis as a family representative." He made a few notes on a legal pad. "The reading will be recorded for legal purposes." A wave of relief mixed with anxiety washed over me. "Mr. Finch, I appreciate your help, but I have to ask about your fees. My resources are limited." Eleanor arranged for all legal expenses related to her estate to be covered. "You don't need to worry about the costs." Mr. Finch's smile broadened slightly. "Your daughter thought of everything, Margaret. Absolutely everything." Something in his tone suggested layers of meaning I couldn't yet grasp. Eleanor had always been a meticulous planner, but the precision of these arrangements felt almost supernatural. "Will Victor bring his own attorney?" "I would expect so. He is entitled to legal representation during estate proceedings." Mr. Finch gathered the documents into neat stacks. "Margaret, I want you to understand something important. Eleanor loved you deeply. Every single provision in her will reflect that love." The words hit me harder than I had expected. 4 days of simmering anger and quiet desperation had temporarily masked the raw edge of my grief. But Mr. Finch's quiet certainty brought it all rushing back. My daughter had been protecting me, even while she was fighting cancer, even while her own husband was plotting my destruction. "Friday at 2 o'clock, Mr. Finch confirmed, handing me a formal appointment card. 28th floor, conference room A. Please bring identification and any documents you think might be relevant." I stood to leave, feeling steadier than I had since the funeral. "Mr. Finch, Can you give me any hint at all about what Eleanor planned? Trust your daughter's judgment. His handshake was firm and final. She knew exactly what she was doing. The elevator ride down felt completely different from the ride up. Instead of desperation, I now carried a fragile, cautious hope. Eleanor had been 3 moves ahead of everyone during her illness, apparently. That included her own husband. Driving back to the motel through the afternoon traffic, I thought about Friday's impending confrontation. Victor would arrive expecting a complete and total victory, probably with his own expensive legal representation in tow. He had spent the last 4 days planning his next moves, completely confident in his position. But Eleanor had been planning for much, much longer. Friday morning arrived with the kind of bitter wind that makes March feel like winter's final, angry assault. I had spent the previous 3 days at the motel in a strange state of suspended animation, too anxious to read, too restless to sleep properly, and too broke to do anything but wait. By 11 o'clock, I was dressed in my funeral suit again, checking my appearance in the motel's unforgiving, streaked mirror. The face looking back at me showed every one of my 65 years, plus the heavy weight of the past week's ordeals. But my eyes held something they hadn't since Eleanor's diagnosis. Purpose. The drive downtown felt different this time. Instead of being propelled by desperation, I was moving toward answers. Whatever Eleanor had planned, today would reveal her final project, and I suspected it would be her masterpiece. I arrived at Finch & Associates 15 minutes early, partly from anxiety and partly from a deep respect for the solemnity of the occasion. The same receptionist greeted me with professional sympathy, directing me to conference room A. It was larger than the room where Mr. Finch and I had met, with a panoramic view of the entire downtown area. Mr. Finch was already there, surrounded by towering stacks of legal documents and what appeared to be audio recording equipment. His manner was calm, but intensely alert, like a surgeon preparing for a complex and delicate operation. Margaret, right on time. He gestured to a chair across from the head of the table. The others should be arriving shortly. The others turned out to be a parade of people whose reactions would define the afternoon. Mark Jennings arrived first, looking deeply uncomfortable in a suit that suggested he'd rather be debugging code than attending legal proceedings. Clara Davis followed, carrying a small purse and wearing the expression of someone bracing for family drama. Then came Victor. He swept into the conference room like a man attending his own coronation, dressed in an expensive black suit that somehow managed to look both appropriately somber and triumphantly elegant. Behind him walked a sharp-faced woman in her 40s, carrying a leather briefcase that screamed high-end legal representation. Miranda Hayes. The woman introduced herself with a crisp handshake. I'm representing Mr. Grant's interests during these proceedings. Victor settled into his chair with the profound satisfaction of someone who had already won. He barely acknowledged my presence, focusing instead on the legal documents spread across Mr. Finch's end of the table. His smile was small but unmistakable. Margaret, why did you even come? There's nothing here for you. The words were delivered with a casual cruelty, loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. Miranda Hayes put a restraining hand on her client's arm, but the damage was done. Mark shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Clara's face hardened with disapproval. I'm here by my legal right as Eleanor's mother, I replied quietly. Legal right to what? You've been living in my house as a tenant. That arrangement ended with my wife's death. Victor's voice carried an absolute, unshakable certainty. Miranda has reviewed all the documentation. Everything belongs to me as the surviving spouse. Mr. Finch cleared his throat, commanding the room's attention with his professional authority. Please, everyone, let's remain calm. Eleanor's will is very specific about all distributions. Let us proceed with the proper formality. Miranda Hayes opened her briefcase, extracting legal pads and what appeared to be prepared challenges. My client expects to receive the entire inheritance as the legal husband. We are prepared to contest any irregular provisions. Noted, Mr. Finch said simply. He activated the recording equipment with a soft click. This is the formal reading of the last will and testament of Eleanor Michael Grant, dated the 15th of December 2024. Present are Margaret Grant, mother; Victor Grant, surviving spouse; Miranda Hayes, attorney for Mr. Grant; Mark Jennings, and Clara Davis, designated witnesses. The room fell silent, save for the soft hum of traffic 28 floors below. Victor leaned forward slightly, his posture radiating pure confidence. I gripped the arms of my chair, preparing myself for disappointment, but still hoping for justice. Mr. Finch opened the thick document, his voice taking on the formal, measured cadence of legal proceedings. I, Eleanor Michael Grant, being of sound mind and body, do hereby establish this as my final will and testament, revoking all previous wills and codicils. The preliminary language washed over me like background noise. My engineering mind was focused solely on the substance, the clauses that would determine whether I would spend my remaining years in a motel room or something resembling a home. Victor's fingers drummed silently against the conference table, keeping time with his internal countdown to victory. But Mr. Finch's slight, knowing smile suggested the afternoon held surprises that none of us were expecting. Now, we come to the specific bequests and distributions, Mr. Finch announced, turning to the crucial pages of the document. The moment of truth had arrived. To my beloved husband, Victor Grant. Mr. Finch's voice carried across the silent conference room with measured precision. I leave the following assets: the family residence at 1247 Maple Grove Drive, Evanston, Illinois, including all furnishings and personal property contained therein. All vehicles currently registered in my name, including the 2024 Porsche 911 and the 2023 Tesla Model X. The checking and savings accounts at First National Bank of Chicago, totaling approximately $340,000. Victor's smile bloomed like a poisonous flower. He leaned back in his chair with visible satisfaction, casting a triumphant, smug glance in my direction. See, Margaret, I told you. You get nothing. Miranda Hayes was taking careful notes, but her expression suggested routine satisfaction rather than surprise. Mark Jennings stared down at his hands, likely calculating the business implications of Victor's inheritance. Clara Davis watched me with deep concern, clearly expecting me to be devastated. Mr. Finch continued reading without acknowledging Victor's interruption. Additionally, Mr. Grant receives all jewelry, artwork, and collectibles purchased during our marriage, valued at approximately $85,000. Mr. Finch, Victor said with a false sweetness, I think we've covered everything important. Margaret can see that Eleanor was very clear about her intentions. Actually, Mr. Finch replied calmly, we have only covered the preliminary distributions. There are additional bequests. He turned the page with a deliberate, almost theatrical slowness. To my mother, Margaret Grant, who sacrificed 18 months of her retirement to care for me during my illness. My heart stopped. Eleanor had remembered. Even while she was dying, she had protected me. I leave 50% ownership of TechFlow Solutions, including all shares, voting rights, and dividend distributions. This represents approximately $35 million in current market valuation. The silence that followed was so profound it was almost deafening. The color drained from Victor's face, as if someone had opened a valve. Miranda Hayes's pen froze halfway through a note. Mark Jennings's head snapped up, his expression one of shock, and something that looked very much like relief. What? Victor's voice cracked like breaking glass. That's impossible. I'm her husband. Everything should belong to me. Mr. Finch continued reading as if he hadn't spoken. Additionally, Mrs. Margaret Grant receives the workshop and all tools constructed for her use, to be relocated to a property of her choosing. all model aircraft collections built together during Eleanor's childhood, and the sum of $150,000 from the Memorial Education Fund. I couldn't breathe. 50% of Eleanor's company. $35 million. The workshop she had built for my retirement. After a week of homelessness and utter desperation, my daughter had given me a level of security beyond anything I could have ever dreamed. This is fraud. Victor shot to his feet, his carefully composed facade shattering into a million pieces. I'll challenge this decision. You orchestrated this, you scheming old woman. Victor. I managed to say through my own shock. This is legal. Eleanor had the right to distribute her assets however she chose. Legal? His laugh was a sharp, bitter bark. You think I'll let you steal half of what belongs to me? He turned to his lawyer. Miranda. Tell them this is contestable. Miranda Hayes was frantically reviewing her notes, clearly recalculating her entire strategy. There may be grounds for an undue influence claim, but nothing. Victor's voice rose to a near shout. Eleanor was sick. She was dying. Her judgment was compromised. This old woman took advantage of her condition. Mark Jennings finally spoke, his voice quiet but firm. Victor. I was present during several of Eleanor's business meetings, right up until the end. Her mind was completely clear. She knew exactly what she was doing. You're all conspirators. Victor whirled to face Mr. Finch. How much did Margaret pay you to write this fiction? Mr. Finch's voice remained professionally calm, despite the outrageous accusations. Mr. Grant, I understand your disappointment, but these distributions were entirely Eleanor's decision. She spent considerable time ensuring every detail was legally sound. Victor turned back to me, his eyes blazing with a fury that made his previous cruelty look mild by comparison. You think you've won something, old woman? I will take everything from you. Every penny, every share, every single tool in that workshop. By the time my lawyers are finished with you, you'll be living in that motel for the rest of your miserable life. Clara Ellis reached across the table and squeezed my hand gently. Eleanor loved you very much, she whispered. But Mr. Finch was organizing his papers with the careful attention of someone whose work was not yet finished. Mr. Grant, please sit down. We haven't completed the reading. What else could there possibly be? Victor remained standing, his hands planted on the conference table like weapons. Mr. Finch's smile was slight, but unmistakable. There is one more condition that affects all previous distributions. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Whatever final bombshell Eleanor had prepared, Mr. Finch was about to detonate it. Alistair Finch's slight smile deepened as he reached for another document from his carefully organized stack. The conference room fell silent again, the only sounds being the soft hum of the recording equipment and Victor's labored, angry breathing as he processed the devastating news about the shared inheritance. There is one more clause in the will, Mr. Finch announced, his voice now carrying the weight of a final, stunning revelation. A special condition that Eleanor added just 3 weeks before her death. Victor's eyes narrowed dangerously. What condition? You're hiding something. The condition states, Mr. Finch read with measured, deliberate precision, that if my husband, Victor, attempts to force my mother, Margaret, to leave our family home within 1 year of my death, the entire inheritance including the house, vehicles, bank accounts, and all business shares automatically transfers in full to Margaret Grant. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the traffic noise from 28 floors below seemed to have stopped. The color drained completely from Victor's face as the devastating implications crashed over him like a collapsing building. No. His voice cracked with desperate disbelief. This is a trap. She couldn't have known. Eleanor also left a video recording explaining her motives. Mr. Finch continued, setting up a small screen on the table. She wanted you to understand her reasoning. The monitor flickered to life, and Eleanor's familiar face appeared thinner than she had been in health, but with eyes that were still sharp with intelligence and love. My heart nearly stopped at the sight of my daughter again, at the sound of her voice coming from beyond death's veil. "Victor, if you're watching this, it means you have evicted my mother from our home." Eleanor's voice was gentle, but firm. "I had hoped you would surprise me. I hoped the man I married would show some compassion during a time of grief, but I know you too well." Victor was hyperventilating now, his hands gripping the conference table so tightly, his knuckles had turned white. Miranda Hayes was frantically taking notes, but her face showed a professional alarm at her client's complete and utter legal collapse. "Mom," Eleanor continued, looking directly into the camera with that same engineer's precision I had taught her, "I'm sorry you had to experience his cruelty, but I've protected you. Everything I built, everything I earned, it's yours now. Use it well. Live comfortably. Honor Dad's memory in that house." The video paused, and Mr. Finch's quiet voice filled the stunned silence. The eviction occurred on March 15th, the day of Eleanor's funeral. The condition was immediately triggered. All assets are transferred to Margaret Grant, effective immediately. "This isn't legal," Victor's voice rose to a near scream. "A will can't have conditions like this." "Actually, it can," Mr. Finch replied calmly. "Conditional inheritance is perfectly legal in the state of Illinois when the conditions are clearly stated and not against public policy." Eleanor consulted extensively to ensure its enforceability. Miranda Hayes finally found her voice. "We will challenge this immediately. Undue influence, mental incapacity, fraudulent." "The video continues," Mr. Finch interrupted, restarting the recording. Eleanor smiled sadly from the screen. "Victor, I loved you for 7 years. I gave you everything I could. But love without kindness is just possession. My mother raised me to treat people with dignity, especially family. I had hoped that our marriage would teach you those same values." Victor made a choking sound and doubled over, as if he had been physically struck. "If you had shown my mother even basic human respect after my death, you would have inherited everything as my husband. But I knew your nature. I gambled on your greed, overcoming your wisdom." Eleanor's expression was sorrowful, but resolved. "I lost that bet. But my mother won her future." The video ended with Eleanor saying quietly, "I love you both, but I protect the people who love others more than they love themselves." Mr. Finch turned off the screen and faced the devastated room. "The legal transfer begins immediately. Mr. Grant, you have 30 days to vacate the property." Victor's breathing became rapid and shallow. His eyes rolled back in his head, and he slumped forward in his chair. Miranda Hayes caught him just as he fainted, calling out for medical assistance. As paramedics were summoned and Victor was revived with smelling salts, I sat motionless, completely overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of my daughter's love and foresight. She had known exactly who her husband was and exactly how he would behave. Even while dying, she had protected me with surgical precision. Mark Jennings broke the stunned silence. Eleanor was always 3 steps ahead of everyone else. Clara Ellis reached over and squeezed my hand. "She saved you, Margaret. Even from the grave, she saved you." Victor was helped from the conference room by the paramedics, Miranda Hayes following close behind with an air of defeated professionalism. As they disappeared into the hallway, Mr. Finch began organizing the documents for the immediate legal transfer. I remained seated, staring at the blank video screen where my daughter's face had been just moments before. Eleanor had given me everything: security, dignity, and the profound knowledge that her love would protect me forever. The game was over. Justice had been served by the most loving hand I had ever known. The next 2 months became a masterclass in legal futility. Despite having lost everything through his own cruel actions, Victor threw himself into challenging Eleanor's will, with the desperation of a man drowning in consequences he had created for himself. Miranda Hayes's law firm occupied an entire floor of a Michigan Avenue high-rise. Their marble lobby was decorated with awards for complex litigation, but all their vaunted expertise couldn't overcome one fundamental problem. Eleanor had been smarter than everyone else in the room, including them. The conditional clause is discriminatory, Miranda argued during the first hearing on April 2nd. It penalizes my client for exercising his legal rights as a property owner. Judge Eleanor Vance, a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and no patience for frivolous arguments, reviewed the documents with clinical precision. The testator had the full legal right to establish the conditions of her inheritance. Counselor, nothing in Illinois law prevents conditional bequests based on a beneficiary's behavior. I attended every single hearing from the gallery, watching Victor's legal team exhaust every possible angle of attack. Undue influence? Mental incapacity? Fraudulent documentation? Discriminatory conditions? Each argument crumbled under Mr. Finch's methodical, calm defense and the irrefutable video evidence of Eleanor's clear-headed reasoning. Mrs. Grant, Mr. Finch had explained during one of our preparation sessions, Eleanor spent 3 months crafting language that would survive any legal challenge. She consulted with estate planning specialists, constitutional lawyers, and even behavioral psychologists. This will is bulletproof. The discovery phase revealed devastating evidence for Victor's case. Witnesses testified about his callous behavior at the funeral. Mark Jennings described his increasing absence during Eleanor's illness. Clara Davis recounted years of observing Victor's materialistic priorities. Even Mrs. Gable from the church provided testimony about his inappropriate comments during the service. The deceased demonstrated clear mental capacity throughout her illness, testified Dr. Matthews, Eleanor's oncologist. Miss Grant continued making complex business decisions until mere weeks before her death. Her cognitive function was never impaired. Victor's own testimony proved disastrous. Under oath, he couldn't deny evicting me on the day of the funeral. He couldn't explain his frequent absences during Eleanor's medical appointments. Most damaging of all, he admitted to spending inheritance money on his legal fees before the will was even probated. So, you accessed the estate accounts immediately after your wife's death? Mr. Finch asked during his cross-examination. I had bills to pay, Victor snapped, his carefully coached composure finally cracking. The funeral expenses, legal consultations, including retainer fees for challenging the very will you assumed would give you everything? Miranda Hayes's objection was sustained, but the damage was done. Victor had revealed exactly the greedy, entitled attitude Eleanor had predicted and so brilliantly protected me against. By early May, even Miranda Hayes was advising a settlement. Margaret, this isn't over, Victor declared after another failed motion. I'll find another way to fight this. But his financial resources were depleting as quickly as his legal options. The expensive law firm required substantial retainers. Expert witnesses cost thousands of dollars per day. Meanwhile, Mr. Finch's fees were being covered by the estate, giving us virtually unlimited legal firepower. The final hearing on May 15th lasted only 30 minutes. Judge Vance had reached her decision based on the overwhelming evidence of Eleanor's mental capacity, the will's legal validity, and Victor's clear triggering of the conditional clause. The testator created a legal document expressing her clear intentions regarding asset distribution, Judge Vance announced. The conditional inheritance clause was properly executed when the surviving spouse evicted the testator's mother from the family residence. All challenges are denied. Costs are awarded against the petitioner. Victor's shoulders sagged as the gavel fell. 2 months of expensive legal warfare had ended exactly where Eleanor's video had predicted, with him losing everything because of his own choices. Mr. Finch and I stood in the courthouse hallway afterward, watching Victor and Miranda Hayes disappear toward the elevators. He moved with the defeated posture of a man who had finally understood the true price of cruelty. "Your daughter was extraordinary, mister," Finch said quietly. "In 30 years of estate law, I have never seen planning this thorough." "Eleanor always finished what she started," I replied, thinking of all the model airplanes we had built together, all the projects she had completed with such engineering precision. This had been her final project. Ensuring justice through love, protection through wisdom, and consequences through choice. Even death couldn't stop Eleanor from taking care of the people who mattered to her. Justice had been served not through revenge, but through the simple truth that actions have consequences, and love protects those who deserve protection. June 1st dawned clear and warm, the kind of perfect Chicago morning that promises summer is finally on its way. I stood on the front steps of the sprawling mansion, holding the same set of keys Eleanor had given me 18 months earlier when I had first moved in to care for her. This time, though, I wasn't a guest or a tenant. I was home. The lock turned smoothly, and the front door opened onto the same hallway where Victor had stood, blocking my entry just 2.5 months ago. Now the house felt different, not because anything had changed physically, but because love and justice had reclaimed it from greed and cruelty. Victor had moved out the previous week with a surprising amount of dignity. Our final conversation had been brief, but civil. "You won, Margaret," he had said while packing a box of his designer shoes. "No, Victor. Eleanor won, but she won't come back," he'd replied. "You're right," I'd said, "but her love and her wisdom live on." He had nodded slowly, perhaps finally understanding that this had never been about winning or losing, but about consequences and character. I had even helped him carry a few suitcases to his car, because Eleanor had raised me to treat people with dignity, regardless of how they had treated me. The house felt peaceful now, filled with warm memories of Eleanor's childhood and her incredible achievements, rather than the heavy tension of her final months. I had kept her home office exactly as she had left it, and that's where I was sitting when Mark Jennings called to discuss our first official business meeting. "Margaret, I know you never planned to run a technology company," Mark said over the phone, "but Eleanor left detailed strategic plans for the next 5 years. With your oversight and my operations management, we can build something truly worthy of her vision." "What did you have in mind?" "Expansion into educational software." Eleanor believed technology should help people learn and grow, not just organize their schedules. We could create learning platforms for engineering students, maybe partner with Northwestern University. The conversation continued for an hour, covering growth projections, hiring plans, and Eleanor's detailed notes about corporate social responsibility. My daughter had built more than just a business. She had created a platform for positive change. As the majority owner, I could ensure that her platform served purposes far beyond mere profit. "Mark, I want to establish something else," I said as our call concluded. "The Eleanor Grant Memorial Scholarship Fund. Full rides for engineering students from working-class families. Kids who have the brains but not the bank accounts. Eleanor would love that idea." After hanging up, I walked through the house, reacquainting myself with rooms that held decades of our family's history. In the workshop Eleanor had built for my retirement, I found a half-finished model airplane, a P-51 Mustang we had started together during one of her better days. I sat at the workbench and picked up the tiny brushes, painting the wings the same vibrant teal Eleanor had chosen for her childhood planes. Clara Davis visited that evening, bringing a casserole in the kind of practical, comforting way that family provides during life's major transitions. "How are you adjusting to all of this?" she asked, settling into Eleanor's favorite chair with a cup of tea. "It's overwhelming sometimes," I admitted. "The money, the business, the responsibility, but I keep hearing Eleanor's voice, telling me to use it well." "She planned everything perfectly, didn't she?" "Better than perfect," I said. "She knew Victor would reveal his true nature, and she protected me from it, even while she was dying. She was taking care of her old mom. Clara smiled sadly. That girl loved you more than her own life. Later that night, I sat in Eleanor's office, reviewing the scholarship fund paperwork Mr. Finch had prepared. The program would provide full tuition, living expenses, and mentorship for 20 students per year. In 10 years, we would have helped 200 bright young kids achieve their dreams. The phone rang just as I was closing the files. The caller ID showed Northwestern University. Mrs. Grant, this is Professor Evelyn Reed. I wanted to personally thank you for establishing the Memorial Scholarship Fund. The first recipient is a young woman from the South Side whose father works 3 jobs to support their family. She reminds me so much of Eleanor, brilliant, determined, and focused on using engineering to help people. After the call ended, I sat quietly in the gathering dusk, looking at Eleanor's photograph on the desk. At 22, she had been full of dreams about changing the world through technology. Now, even after her death, she was making those dreams possible for others. Outside, Evanston settled into a peaceful evening quiet. The house felt alive with purpose, rather than empty with grief. Victor's cruelty had been transformed into an opportunity for deserving young people. I picked up the tiny P-51 Mustang model and painted one more rose gold stripe across its wing. Some traditions were worth continuing, some love was worth honoring, and some justice was worth the wait. Eleanor had been right about everything, as usual. Love protects, wisdom prevails, and sometimes, if you plan carefully enough, you can take care of the people you love, even after you're gone. The old workshop hummed quietly around me as I worked, and I could almost hear my daughter's voice. Asterisk. Looking good, Mom. But maybe try a little more teal on the tail section. Asterisk. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.